Hello and good day, Prime Minister Trudeau. This message is largely an apology to the people of Vietnam for the death of a Vietnamese student in 2014. I was involved indirectly. For the Vietnamese officials in Ottawa, I would not advise listening to my earlier messages to my government. They are quite graphic. I will also apologize for my inability to even attempt many Vietnamese names. A stroke last September has ended my ability to use many letter combinations. My name is Jeffrey Ort. My life has been short and violent. I have investigated physical and sexual predators in the education systems of 18 countries over 25 years. Immigration records will show I vacationed in Vietnam in either 2011 or 2012 when I lived and worked in Malaysia. Those same records will show I lived and worked in Hanoi for 2013, leaving only to present papers and research in Indonesia. Immigration records will show I lived and worked in Ho Chi Minh City for 2014, leaving only to present papers and research in Cambodia. I was diagnosed with 3 terminal medical issues at 19 and told I would struggle to see 40. Life gave me the skills to be employed to investigate physical and sexual predators, which I began at 18 in Canada. I continued this work overseas when I lost the ability to perform manual labor in my late 20s. By my late 30s, I was having trouble passing the medical exams for some international work visas. In 2005, I had emergency surgery to save my life in South Korea from these accumulating deformities and disabilities. In 2007, I learned of my son and his death in Canada while I was overseas. I grieve him and what his mother went through alone to this day. In 2009, a woman that I had loved my entire life but couldn't be with because of my health reached out of the ether and asked me to father children for her. That is how I learned that the medical treatments that weren't extending my life ended my ability to have children. She is the strongest and most amazing woman that I have ever met, and my medical issues weren't the problem. She was so concerned that my employment, investigating predators, would prevent her and I from adopting, that she packed her things and left. I respect her even more for choosing children over me. I grieve the loss of her and our family as much as my son from his mother. I lost 2 families in only 2 years. In 2012, I had a major motorcycle accident in Malaysia which sped the decline of my ability to work. I needed emergency surgery again in Oman just before my 40th birthday, and I had been told my entire adult life that I would struggle to see 40, and I certainly have. The sum total of my declining health and desire to return to Canada to grieve my lost families led to the decision in Oman that I would never again investigate predators. I decided I would complete a U.S. teaching license while living and working in Vietnam where I could still pass the medicals. I wanted to spend my last years making amends to those women and my son for my lost families. I got the licenses, but nothing else worked out. In 2013, I worked in Hanoi at a private high school 3 days a week as a Cambridge teacher trainer. I built their Linux lab, which is a computer thing. I taught IELTS in the evenings at a different school, and the Vietnamese government trained me as a Cambridge examiner. I worked as a Cambridge examiner in the Vietnamese public school system whenever I was needed. I was afloat at other schools as favors to people I met in Hanoi. In the fall of 2013, I was contacted by, recruited, and interviewed by the Director of Studies for the Vietnam Australia School in Ho Chi Minh City. He had reached out to me after learning about my research from Malaysia, Oman, and Hanoi. I accepted his job offer and moved to Ho Chi Minh City in January of 2014. In January of 2014, I began my teaching licenses and worked at the Vietnam Australia School. There are several schools with similar names, and I am not sure if my original school has changed its name slightly or not. The internet indicates it goes by the Vietnam Australia International School now, but still uses the shorter acronym VAS. I worked at the Ba Thang Hai campus, a Vietnamese name that I cannot say correctly, and the VAS school also had a sister school with a very similar name in 2014. I think it was VUS. I didn't work there. I was employed along with a dozen or so other people as Cambridge curriculum design specialists. Our job was to interview students that hadn't quite made the cutoff in language skills for admission to the Cambridge program at VAS. Our job was to design and teach month-long intensive immersion programs that would target the language skills that they needed to pass the entrance requirements for the Cambridge program. The students could be retested at a third-party location once a month. Between being first contacted by VAS in the fall of 2013 and arriving on campus for work in January of 2014, the school went through at least 3 directors of study that I know of. The school and all 5 of its campuses were in utter chaos and turmoil. The oldest and most influential of the original board of director members for the school had left for a teaching position in Australia unexpectedly and without notice or warning. The power vacuum led to an incredible amount of infighting as everyone scrambled for his position on the board. In 2012 and 2013, the work environment at the VAS school was so caustic that the entire foreign staff for the Batang High campus quit. Every single foreigner on the largest campus of this school quit. The school had to scramble to hire an entire foreign faculty in one summer in order to have them in the schools to teach for September of 2013. By the time I arrived in January of 2014, 70% of the replacements had quit the school, and the school was on its 3rd or 4th director of study. The director that originally interviewed me had quit, the director that finalized my interview had quit, and the director that handled my orientation the first week of January quit. By the 2nd week of January, I was dealing with Director of Studies number 4. His name was Mike Smith. In all the chaos and turmoil, our project, the one that I was hired to work on, got swept to the side and ignored. There were too many other things that were too important than a handful of students that needed special classes. The students figured this out very quickly and wouldn't come to class at all. Some of the teachers were content to collect a paycheck and do nothing. I had to video record my lessons as part of my teaching licensing program. I had to teach a class of at least a dozen students or it didn't count towards my license. I spoke with HR and was stalled for almost a month. They didn't want to lose another foreigner, but I also wasn't on a normal teacher's contract, so my salary was higher than they really wanted to pay for a classroom teacher. I went to Director Smith and explained my situation and asked for a subject to teach or permission to leave. I didn't really need it. I was still well within the probation period where I could simply walk out the door. I just felt I should give the school a chance. Director Smith couldn't break my contract and did not appear to want to. He couldn't make me a new contract, although he couldn't make me sign a new contract, although he did try a couple of times to encourage that. Instead, I was sent to the math department as the highest paid teacher in the math department. Director Smith and I had compromised. I would replicate the research I had published in Oman and Hanoi while carrying a normal teaching load in exchange for my higher than normal salary. My research and math lessons went extremely well, and I replicated enough data to present new papers in Cambodia. I was given paid time off to attend 2 concurrent conferences in Cambodia where I delivered both the papers, scheduled workshops, as well as several ad hoc workshops at the request of IDP representatives. I returned to Vietnam to find the head of the math department was upset. He knew of the research projects I was working on, he knew of my salary, and he knew that I was being given paid time off to go present at these conferences. But while I was gone, enough people complained about him, in the midst of all the school turmoil and confusion, that he decided to take his frustrations out on this new guy with the limp. I happened to have one leg longer than the other and walk with a limp. This man's name was Mike Tidy. His complaints to Director Smith while I was gone caused Director Smith to revisit my CV and work history. I returned from Cambodia to find Director Smith had vetted my history as a teacher trainer and an investigator of teachers. He had called my employers and found out what I used to do. He explained that Tidy was a problem, that he had his position as the head of a math department because he was sleeping with a member of Vietnamese administration. Director Smith wanted me to assess Tidy's classroom skills because I had documented thousands of hours of classroom assessments through my employment history. In Malaysia alone, I was doing 25 to 30 hours of in-classroom assessments every week for nearly 2 years. I refused to look into Mike Tidy. I was not paid to do that work. I did not want to do that work. The entire reason I was in Vietnam and doing my teaching licenses is so that I would never have to again investigate teachers or predators. There was nothing initially wrong, nothing superficially wrong to indicate that Tidy was a problem on the scale of problems that I normally dealt with. Director Smith insisted that I at least have a look at him, and I agreed. The red flags for Mike Tidy were instantaneous. He had no work history on his CV. He had a huge hole in his CV in 2012. His CV listed him as an art student from 2007 to 2011, a graduate student for only 2011, where he earned his teaching license for both New York State and Ontario. He had qualified teacher status, which is a British designation, and in 2014, you had to teach in the UK to get that. His CV listed him as the head of the math department from the very first day of work. All of this immediately indicated that he was not qualified to lead a math department, and he was hiding something that happened in 2012, the year that's not on his CV. And he's hiding the explanation for how he obtained qualified teacher status without being in the UK. I asked Tidy about this, and he explained he had taught in the UK for 2012, but that it didn't meet the VAS standards for a pay bump, so he left it off his CV. That is not how that works. A hole like this is a giant neon sign for trouble. After I spoke with Tidy, several teachers warned me that Tidy had performed so poorly in September of 2013 that a group of 12-year-old students followed him to the bathroom and physically and sexually humiliated him by waiting until he was mid-number 2 with his pants down and sitting on a toilet. And then they kicked in the stall door to see his genitals. They then ran through the school screaming about his genitals in Vietnamese. Tidy chased them, screaming at them. Tidy was called into the director's office, which is made entirely of glass walls, and was reprimanded while all of the students gathered to watch. This was a common game or contest with the students at this school. Tidy was made the head of the math department by his Vietnamese partner, a member of administration, and these teachers explained that he used her and her friends to discredit or fire teachers that upset him. I asked Tidy about the rumors. I asked him directly, and he admitted that the bathroom incident had indeed happened the way people explained. But he claimed he was promoted to the head of the math department for all the extra work he did while people were quitting in September and October of 2013. He did not explain why he claimed to be the head of the math department from the very beginning. I told Director Smith that I wanted nothing to do with this situation, that it was a colossal mess for HR to sort out. It was not my responsibility. I was not paid to do this. It was not part of my contract. Director Smith insisted that I assess his classroom skills, as that was what most of the complaints were about, and I had the most experience assessing foreign staff in a classroom. Through Director Smith, Tidy was scheduled to teach 2 math classes while I observed. He did not know it was a formal observation for the director and for HR. He opened his class by physically and sexually humiliating female students, very similarly to how he was humiliated. He ordered everyone to assume physically and sexually exposing and humiliating positions, telling them that this is how they'll be punished if they misbehave in class. I shut it down as quickly as I realized what was happening. Tidy was rattled because no one had ever told him he's not allowed to do something before, and he did try to teach his lesson. But he had not reviewed the content. He had not prepared for the class. He had not prepared any kind of scaffold or support or worksheets. He had done nothing. He walked into the classroom assuming that he could teach grade 6 math by looking at the book for a split second. He could not. He could not perform basic grade 6 math. The students knew it. They watched him fumble and stumble on the board, and that rattled him even more. He walked out of the classroom after 15 minutes, saying that he was done. He was scheduled to teach a grade 7 class later that day, or the next day, I don't remember anymore. I warned him not to do the disciplinary thing again, that it was inappropriate and humiliating, especially for the girls. Tidy did it anyway, and I shut him down even faster the second time. He was even more rattled that I would stand up to him. Tidy couldn't do the math for the grade 7 lesson and gave up even quicker this time. I submitted a verbal report to Director Smith and insisted HR be involved. I demanded that Tidy at the very least be removed from the classroom and trained in appropriate classroom strategies. I demanded that I be transferred to a new campus and a new department and that I never have anything to do with this again. I was pulled into multiple HR meetings to testify to what I had seen. I was transferred to the Hoang Van Thu campus, I can't say that name correctly either, and I was transferred to their ICT department, which again is a computer thing. I was made to sign a new non-disclosure agreement because I had been employed by Director Smith outside the limits of my original contract. Tidy was, to my knowledge, removed from the classroom for the end of that semester and for the summer. He was given additional administrative duties to justify not being in a classroom, and he lists that on his CV as a promotion to the head of all of secondary Phase 1. Tidy and many others, as part of the power struggle ongoing at the school, had a reputation for having teachers fired by having Vietnamese teachers, through Tidy's Vietnamese partner, file complaints about foreign teachers until they quit or HR was forced to fire them. The Vietnamese heads of secondary testified on my behalf on multiple occasions, as they had worked closely with me on the research projects that were published in Cambodia. They also attended those conferences, paper presentations, and workshops. On my return to Vietnam, but working at another campus and in another department, Tidy filed an endless stream of complaints demanding that I be returned to the math department. I refused. HR refused. The new non-disclosure agreement was contingent on me having no contact with Tidy, being at a different campus, and being in a different department. Director Smith was caught up in this power struggle, having sided with the wrong group, and was fired shortly after all of these events. For the rest of the spring semester of 2014, we had no director of studies. I went on vacation that summer, 2014. I did not participate in the summer school because I did not want to participate in the summer school, and because Tidy was involved in a non-teaching portion, and I did not want contact with him. My transfer to another campus and another department, as well as my NDA, required that I have no contact with him, and it was my intention to return to the school in the fall to complete my teacher licensing program, which had been progressing very nicely, especially since leaving the math department. David Burpee was hired as the next Director of Studies the summer of 2014. He was my 5th Director of Studies in only a few months at the school. I was paid my regular salary as per my contract and not required to teach during the summers. I was not employed in the summer program, which would have paid me almost that much again. I chose not to double my salary, simply to avoid Tidy and any complications. As favors to both my friends that were summer school teachers, and my sister and her daughter who were coming to visit me in Vietnam, I made special arrangements through HR and through the Vietnamese teachers for my niece to spend time with some of the Vietnamese classes. These students had made my niece welcome signs that I hung in the airport when she arrived, and they made welcome cards for her that I displayed in her hotel room. I did all of these things because my niece had never traveled internationally, and I was concerned she would become overwhelmed, as Vietnam would be the first place she had ever been outside of rural Nova Scotia. For many of the Vietnamese students, this would be the first time that they would ever play with or speak to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, English-speaking Canadian girl their own age. As a result of my visits to the campus, setting up the visits to the classrooms for my niece, I met David Burpee on a number of occasions. I explained my presence and plans. I observed his conduct and demeanor with both foreign and Vietnamese staff. He was quite hostile from the very beginning. He immediately sided with what he considered the most powerful faction in the ongoing struggle at the school. This faction centered on a Vietnamese official named Locke, who has nothing to do with any of these events. He was simply someone angling for the vacant board of directors position. And apparently many people considered him the best person to back in order to get what they wanted. The school was in such turmoil, the turnover in staff, especially with the directors, and the ongoing harassment and firing of teachers, made me so concerned by Burpie's conduct and what it would mean for my ability to stay at the school that I had a quick look at his 2014 CV, which claimed he was a retired New York State Superintendent of Education. However, a quick search on my part turned up newspaper articles from the US reporting that he had been removed from his position 6 months before he claims he retired. Those same articles describe him being forced to finish his contract as a consultant, not a superintendent. Like Tidy, Burpie's CV has large holes in it, which could have both acceptable or unacceptable explanations. Burpie claimed to be the campus principal for a Ho Chi Minh school the year before, but when I contacted that school, they had no record of him. He claimed to have worked there only the year before, and yet there were no photos of him on the website. He was not listed anywhere in the staff, faculty, or administration. I called the school he claimed to have just left to be told that no one by that name had ever worked there. I did not have the authority from my work to look any further, and I did not really want to. In August of 2014, Burpie opened many of the orientation speeches for the incoming teachers, as well as the returning teachers, at the standard orientation for the start of a school year. He stated multiple times that he was not making the mistakes at VAS that he had made at his previous job. The previous job that claims he didn't work for them. He used many expressions in 2014 to convey that he was at VAS as a wrecking ball. His opening speeches used many expressions like my way or the highway, or get on the train or get off the train, or extra, meaning unpaid work, will be reflected in your year-end bonus. Burpie had a particular fondness for referring to VAS as the company, in all caps and bold, in all written communications, as well as in all his public remarks. It was pure intimidation, and he looked foolish, as if he worked for some sort of clandestine spy agency. At one point during these speeches in 2014, Tidy stood up and explained his disciplinary process for making students stand in humiliating positions. He claimed he had done this in every class since he started in 2013, and he was teaching 50 periods a week across 5 campuses at that time. That amounts to thousands of students across 5 campuses he repeatedly physically and sexually humiliated, and then bragged about it in public as the key to his success as a classroom teacher. The man was the embodiment of the Dunning-Kruger effect, and Burpie was present when these statements were made. I met and spoke with HR on all of these topics in August of 2014, as my silence was conditional on Tidy having been removed from the classroom and retrained. He publicly claimed that he had taught nonstop and assaulted students nonstop. HR claimed that several staff had quit over the summer, taking and destroying many files, including my own. They claimed they had no record of my transfer to the new campus or the new department. They claimed they had no record of the new or different NDA, and they claimed they did not even have my original contract. They claimed they had no file of any sort indicating that I was employed at the school. I started looking for a new job immediately. And I was again being harassed by Tidy through HR complaints, and now Burpie, as they both were in the group supporting Locke. In the last weeks of August and the first weeks of September, Burpie's reputation for firing people for Tidy and his partner grew. In only weeks, it grew to such repute that a transfer to the kindergarten program of any campus, which is where Tidy's partner had the most influence, a transfer to any kindergarten program was viewed as a warning you would be fired if you didn't immediately quit. There was a constant stream of foreign teachers, especially female foreign teachers, because of the kindergarten component. These teachers were being railroaded by forced transfers to the kindergarten programs. They were being railroaded by false complaints. These were mostly female teachers, and they would be in Burpie's office crying and trying to explain what was being done to them, and he didn't care. They would leave his office crying and quitting or being fired only days later. In late August, I was considering jobs both inside and outside Vietnam. And before I could finalize a new job, a 12-year-old Vietnamese student jumped to their death from their apartment building. The Vietnamese teachers spread the rumor that the student had left a note telling their parents that they didn't want to go back to VAS, they didn't want to go back to students and teachers that humiliated them every day. The note said that they hoped they woke up in somewhere better. I immediately contacted lawyers in Vietnam for advice, and I did what I was instructed to do. I filed paperwork and submitted my records to the Vietnamese government. I filed paperwork and submitted my records to the Labor Board. I filed my paperwork and my records with several wrongful death attorneys, asking that they forward my records to the family of the student that had taken their life. I filed my paperwork and records with the Canadian government through their online system. It was essentially an email. I left Vietnam for a job at the end of September or beginning of October. The job was in China so that I would be close if called back to testify in court. Once I was out of the country, I sent all of my records to the senior teachers and senior administrators, including Burpee, in early October 2014. Burpee has all the same documents that the Canadian and Vietnamese government does. And most importantly, he received them and asked teachers about them before the Vietnamese police investigated the death of that student. I received sporadic messages from teachers at VAS over the next few months in 2014. All of them thanking me because Locke, Tidy, Tidy's partner, Burpee, and almost everyone connected to the faction supporting Locke. One of the most annoying aspects of LinkedIn is I get updates about people I don't want to know about just because we worked at the same schools. In 2015, Tidy turned up at another school in Ho Chi Minh City as a PE teacher and a coach for the girls' swim team. He stopped using LinkedIn shortly thereafter, so I don't know where he is or what has happened to him. Burpee showed up at a different Ho Chi Minh City school, but his work history was scrubbed of the names of the two previous schools he had worked at in Vietnam. He had originally claimed he wouldn't make the same mistakes at VAS as he did the year before. And then at VAS, he reinstated a child molester, harassed the teacher that testified against the child molester until that teacher left, and I believe he participated in covering up the connection between Tidy and the death of that student when the Vietnamese police investigated. The Vietnamese officials in Canada in 2023, I realize that this has been a long explanation and that it all happened 10 years ago. I want you to understand it was my loss of my two families before I arrived in Vietnam that prompted my decision to refuse to investigate these situations when they occurred in 2014. That the first time I ever refused to investigate a predator, it ended in the death of a student, and that I have grieved and felt responsible for the loss of that student as much as for the loss of my own families and my own son. The Vietnamese situation has eaten away at me since it happened, and in 2017 I tried to return to Canada and testify before my government as to all of these events. In 2017, an even more unbelievable series of things have happened. Things that are part of my previous messages to my government. I have tried several times since 2019, and I have simply had too many health issues, too many things going on. I tried last year and ran into problems, and I tried again earlier in April and in early May of this year. I have tried numerous times to testify before my government about these events, and I have been unable to. The stroke I had last fall is getting worse. The headaches are getting worse. The fatigue and the inability to sleep is resulting in me sleeping 3 to 4 times a day in short bursts. This is triggering seizures and temporary strokes that are worse. I'm waking up partially blind, choking on stomach acid, and being partly or fully unable to use my left side as often as every time I wake up. My health is getting worse. I don't think I will make it to Ontario to apologize in person or to answer any questions that you might have. If you wanted to find Mike Tidy, Canada could help if they chose to. If you wanted to find David Burpee, he would be even easier. He appears to live and work in Toronto for Rosedale International Education. LinkedIn has recently reminded me of this. If it was something the people of Vietnam wanted to do, they could check with the Vietnamese police to see when their investigations took place. Burpee was given all of my files on October 1st or October 2nd of 2014. I have provided an email which indicates that he had discussed the situation with staff by October 6th. If Burpee was questioned about any of these events, you have my documents to show what he knew when. If you really wanted to push the issue, to do the things that I used to be employed to do, if you wanted to push Burpee's involvement, he, as an educational professional, had an obligation to forward my files to the Vietnamese police no matter when he received them. If he did not lie during the investigation, he lied by not forwarding that information to them after the investigation. If the people of Vietnam were interested, they would be able to refer him to law enforcement in Vietnam, Canada, and the US for the obstruction of an international child sexual abuse investigation, for the obstruction of any possible manslaughter or wrongful death investigations that the Vietnamese police undertook. This is exactly the kind of work I used to do when my health allowed it, and it is exactly the kind of work that I used to do when my employers required it of me, and it is exactly the kind of work that I refused to do in order to try to come home.